Eurozone is in big trouble, and the global economy could be next. The data released by the European Union's statistics agency reveals that consumer prices fell by 0.2% in December compared to the same period last year. Eurozone's inflation rate fell below zero last month for the first time since the global financial crisis in 2008. The new data adds to existing fears that the Eurozone could be heading toward a prolonged economic downturn. Meanwhile, the value of the euro against the dollar has dropped for a fourth straight day and earlier today hit a 9-year low. All of this comes amid speculation that the European Central Bank will soon announce new measures to help the Eurozone avoid even more economic turmoil. So just how bad is the situation in Europe right now, and is the global economy at risk of another economic collapse? Joining me now for more on all this is Professor Richard Wolff, a professor, economist, and author of Democracy at Work. Professor Wolff, welcome back.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Well, I guess the top news out of Europe right now is what's going on in Paris with the terrorists, and we will be getting to that in the next block in about 10 minutes. I think that far more consequential, or at least in a different way very consequential, is the economic information. This is going to affect the lives of millions, hundreds of millions of people, arguably. What's your take on the newest data released out of Europe?
Well, it's a confirmation, if it was still needed, of something that's been going on for the entirety of the last year. It is a kind of lesson that the policies followed in Europe, which are called austerity, which are a response to the economic crisis since 2007, by government cutting back, laying off workers, doing the sorts of things in Europe that the Republicans want to do in this country. It doesn't work. It hasn't solved their problems, and it, in fact, has made the situation worse. The unemployment is worse. The cutbacks in production are worse. Now prices are falling, which have this peculiar effect that if you're a consumer and you see prices falling, you're not going to buy anything now. You might as well wait till they fall a little further, which actually brings the very bad reality into existence. So wherever you look in Europe, you're seeing the signs of an uncontrollable capitalist economy, which the government is actually trying to deal with, but in fact making worse by the austerity that has been imposed on the European people. And you see in places like Greece and now in Italy and Spain the beginning of a mass movement to stop this craziness before the European economies dissolve into a social crisis that goes way beyond the mere economic downturn.
If the economics of austerity in Europe are patently stupid on their face, where did this ideology come from? How did it get sold to the European people?
Well, I think there's really no nice way to put this, so let me be blunt. When the crisis hit in 2007, the first reaction was to have the government come in every country, Britain, the United States, France, Germany, you name it, and bail out the banks, bail out the big corporations, and go in there without concern about how much money it cost. The government would print the money or borrow it. As soon as that immediate crisis was overcome and the economies were still in trouble, a funny thing happened. Instead of deciding, okay, we've bailed out the companies and the banks, now let's do something for the average majority of our people, instead of doing that, instead the problem became, gee, the government is in debt. Of course the government was in debt. It had just bailed out all the big cats in the economy, but that was forgotten. And instead, what we had to do was deal with the deficit. So we raised taxes, making life for the average person harder, not easier. And we cut back government spending and programs, making the life of the average person harder, not easier. And so we have the unraveling that we face today. And I think the reality is that we as a society in North America and Western Europe got caught up in this way of thinking that was terribly useful for the 5% at the top and terribly destructive for everybody else. And now we're paying the deep and difficult price of having indulged that strange way of understanding the world.
Juan Cole has a fascinating analysis of the murder today at the Satire magazine in Paris. He suggests that because Muslim extremists have been actually having a hard time recruiting people, particularly in France, because young Muslims want to go to the disco, right? They don't want to do the jihad thing, that they would create a provocation which would then create a backlash, that the Le Pen, the whole right-wing movement is on the ascendancy, that those people would then, the backlash would be that they'd like go burn down a mosque or kill some Muslims, and then that would provoke the backlash, which would be the recruiting of new Muslim extremists, that this was the goal of these people, which makes a certain amount of sense. It seems like if that's the case, destroying the lives of people economically is playing into essentially the same thing. I mean, to what extent does the austerity that we're seeing drive the racist right-wing, the Le Pen and other groups around Europe?
Well, I think you put your finger on a very important and very big issue. This is a capitalist system that we live in, and it is now functioning in such a way that it is literally destroying itself. It is creating a gap between rich and poor that produces one social conflict after another. In Greece, for example, the mass of people have basically deserted the traditional two parties that held Greece together for a long time because they're associated with a failed economic system and with a failed government policy. And the majority of Greeks are going to the left for the Syriza party, which stands to win at the election on the 25th of January, but a significant smaller part is going to the extreme right, the Golden Dawn Party, which is anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, and all the rest. So you see the dysfunctionality of capitalism literally destroying its own base among people and driving them then to extreme acts and to this kind of politics by provocation. But these are signs of a society that isn't holding together, and fundamentally that is rooted in an economic system which is serving way too few people at the expense of the majority.
And the majority gets that, and they're increasingly mad as hell and not going to take it anymore.
Right. And the only sad point is, when you're quite right, the only sad thing is when they get angry and they don't want to take it anymore, the question is, who do they hold accountable? For some people, it's foreigners. For other people, it's immigrants. For still other people, it's the bad government. What has to happen is to recognize that this is a systemic problem. Beating up this one or shooting that one doesn't solve the problem that is at the base of this difficulty. And I think that is what's beginning to emerge, is an awareness that we really have a system problem here, and you don't solve a problem of a system other than by dealing with the question, has this system outlived its historical position in world history? Is there an alternative system? How do we get there? What are the costs of making the shift? And so on. We've been afraid in the United States for 50 years to talk about that, but we're not anymore able to do anything else if we're going to deal with the problem.
Yeah, and these are all very important issues that you deal with at length in your books, which I commend to our viewers. Meanwhile, this week, the price of oil continues to fall. It's below $49 a barrel right now. Oil has not been that low since April of 2009, and I'm not even sure if that's in inflation-adjusted dollars. To average consumers, that seems great. More money to spend, less at the pump, more in your wallet. But is this falling oil price a good thing?
It's actually a very mixed thing, and it has been badly treated in much of the press. Sure, a falling oil price is great for whoever buys oil because you get it for less. But for example, if a company that refines oil into gasoline pays less for the oil, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will equivalently drop the price of gas. And in fact, they haven't done that because they're cashing in on this good time for them. They're not passing it all through to us. But here's another example of how to have to think about this. We have in the United States borrowed, as a people, billions of dollars to invest in fracking, in getting the oil from the oil shale in the Canada sands in North Dakota and all through the middle of the United States. All of those investments, all of those borrowings were done on the assumption that oil would sell between $80 and $120 a barrel. Now that it is selling for $40-something a barrel, those investments cannot pay off. Those debts cannot be repaid. Those American banks that made the loans are in trouble. Those American oil companies in those states. If you go to Texas, if you go to North Dakota, you'll see the people there are terrified at how bad this is going to play out. That's a cost here in the United States, and that will ramify through the economy and will have at least as powerful an impact as the cheapening at the gas pump for running your car or heating your home. And you have to see that balance, or else you'll misunderstand how serious a disruption of our economic system the falling price of oil provokes.
Yeah. Just 10 seconds left, Professor Wolff. Do you think that this drop in oil prices could provoke a stock market crash?
Yes, I think it's like the subprime mortgages. We don't know how many derivative contracts were written on all the loans and all the investments in the oil business.
Yeah.
We just don't know.
Yeah.
And so this is an uncertainty.
Right. Brilliant. Professor Richard Wolff, it's always a pleasure talking with you, sir. Thank you for dropping by.
My pleasure, too.
Thank you.